What happens when a blind police officer and his loyal K-9 face an unexpected life or death situation? Can they prove that true courage comes from within, even when the world doubts them? Watch as Officer Marcus Carter and Max, his German shepherd, defy the odds to save lives in a gripping courtroom showdown. Will they succeed, or will skepticism stand in their way? Find out now, only on Voices of the Underdog. Don't forget to like and subscribe. The courtroom was filled with an electric tension that could almost be felt in the air. It was the kind of silence that seemed to hang heavily over every person in the room, as if the building itself was holding its breath in anticipation of what would unfold next. Sitting at the plaintiff's table, with his back straight and a calm, unwavering expression, was Officer Marcus Carter, a man who had spent over a decade serving his city with pride, dedication, and distinction. But today, none of that seemed to matter. Today, Marcus was facing something far more difficult than any criminal he had ever pursued. He was fighting for his right to continue serving the city he had sworn to protect, and the challenge was not coming from any lawbreaker or criminal mastermind, but from the very system he had always believed in. Marcus wasn't alone. At his side was Max, his loyal K-9 companion, a black German shepherd who had been with him through thick and thin. Max sat quietly by his side, sensing the tension in the air. His eyes, full of intelligence and unwavering loyalty, never left Marcus. Max's presence was more than just that of a partner. He was Marcus's eyes, his most trusted companion in a world that had grown increasingly difficult to navigate. Together, they made an unbeatable team, one that had saved lives, solved cases, and brought criminals to justice. But today, even Max's loyalty and skill couldn't save Marcus from the harsh reality that was unfolding. The New Orleans City courtroom was as imposing as any other, with its high ceilings and columns that seemed to stretch up toward the heavens. The room was grand, designed to inspire respect, but for Marcus, the weight of the place felt suffocating. The rows of wooden pews were filled with spectators, journalists, and legal personnel. Some were there out of genuine curiosity, while others were waiting to see if the blind officer would be able to prove himself worthy of the title he had carried for so many years. The judge's gavel was poised above his bench, and the room had quieted down to a low murmur as everyone waited for the proceedings to begin. At the bench sat Judge Brandon Thompson, a man who had long been known for his tough, no-nonsense approach to the law. His reputation preceded him, and he was not someone easily swayed by emotions or sentiment. He had earned the title of being a man of logic and pragmatism, a believer in the rule of law above all else. But there was something else about Judge Thompson that Marcus knew all too well: his skepticism of people who didn't fit the traditional mold of law enforcement. And Marcus, in his eyes, was no exception. Marcus knew this wasn't just any hearing. It was a trial that would determine his future. Despite having served in the force for over 10 years, accumulating awards and commendations, he had never been faced with something so difficult. His blindness had always been a challenge, but it had never stopped him before. He had learned to rely on his other senses, on his instincts, and, most importantly, on his incredible bond with Max. But the world wasn't always so understanding. For many, the idea of a blind officer on the force was simply unthinkable. And in the eyes of Judge Thompson, it was nothing short of absurd. The very idea that someone without sight could be effective in such a physically demanding role was beyond the judge's understanding. And so, in the eyes of the law, Marcus's continued service was now in jeopardy. As the proceedings began, the tension in the room rose palpably. The judge took his gavel and struck it once, signaling the start of the hearing. "Officer Carter, Judge Thompson's voice boomed, sharp and cutting through the quiet. "I must say, it's commendable that you've served this city for so long, but I can't help but wonder, how can a blind man possibly serve as a police officer? You are tasked with making split-second decisions, assessing situations, and reacting quickly. I need to know, how do you expect to do that?" The room fell silent, the words hanging in the air like a heavy fog. It was a question that stung, not just because it was posed by a judge, but because it had been asked countless times before by others who didn't understand the challenges Marcus faced. Marcus remained seated, his expression unwavering. He had faced questions like this before, but this time it felt different. This time, it wasn't just a matter of proving his ability. It was about proving that he deserved to keep the job he had dedicated his life to. "I understand your concern, Your Honor," Marcus began, his voice steady and composed. "But what you may not know is that I don't do this alone. I have a partner, one who has been with me through every moment of my career. His name is Max." Max's ears perked up at the mention of his name, and his tail wagged once, as though acknowledging the praise. But Marcus wasn't just speaking about the dog. He was speaking about the deep, unshakable bond they shared. Max wasn't just a companion. He was Marcus's eyes. He had been trained to detect everything Marcus couldn't see, and over the years they had become an unstoppable team. "Max and I are a unit," Marcus continued, his voice growing more confident. "I'm not here to replace the abilities of a sighted officer. I'm here to enhance them. Max helps me assess situations, locate suspects, and keep people safe. Together, we make decisions as one." The judge raised an eyebrow, clearly unimpressed. He leaned forward, his voice laced with skepticism. "Enhance, prove it. Show us how you and your dog function as one unit. Show us that you're capable of doing the job you claim to do." The challenge was clear. The eyes of the courtroom turned toward Marcus, waiting for him to answer, to do something that would prove his worth. Some spectators exchanged uncertain glances, while others seemed to enjoy the spectacle. But Marcus remained calm, his mind focused on one thing: Max. "All right, Your Honor," Marcus said, his voice steady. "We'll show you." In the next moments, Marcus prepared to do what many believed was impossible, to prove to the courtroom, to Judge Thompson, and to everyone watching, that despite his blindness, he was more than capable of continuing his work as a police officer. He wasn't going to just sit there and let them judge him for something he had no control over. No, he was going to show them what he and Max could do. He turned to Max, speaking softly to his partner, giving the command that had been practiced countless times before: "Seek." Max immediately sprang into action, his ears twitching as he listened to the room, his nose sniffing the air for any scent that might give him a clue. The courtroom was tense, and a few people whispered under their breath. Max's keen senses worked overtime as he made his way across the room. His paws padded softly across the polished floor, his eyes trained on the scent trails that Marcus had long since learned to trust. Judge Thompson watched, unimpressed, as Max sniffed around the room. He crossed his arms, his skepticism still evident. But then, something happened. Something that no one could have predicted. The silence in the courtroom was almost unbearable, the weight of the moment pressing down on everyone in attendance. The soft shuffle of papers, the low murmur of whispers, and the occasional cough were the only sounds in the otherwise tense room. Officer Marcus Carter sat still, his expression unchanged, despite the storm of emotions swirling inside him. He could feel the heat of the challenge coming from Judge Brandon Thompson, who was leaning forward, his sharp eyes never leaving Marcus. The New Orleans City courtroom felt colder now. It wasn't just the grandiose architecture or the hard wooden benches. It was the heavy, suffocating atmosphere of doubt and skepticism that filled the air. Marcus had been through countless high-pressure situations in his career as a police officer, but none of them had prepared him for this moment. Here, it wasn't just a criminal he had to face. It was the very system that had once embraced him, now questioning his ability to serve. Judge Thompson's voice broke the silence. It was firm, almost biting, and filled the courtroom with the weight of his words. "Officer Carter," the judge began, his tone dripping with skepticism, "I appreciate your service, but let's face reality. You say you and your K9, Max, are a team. You say that your blindness doesn't hinder your ability to perform your duties. But here's the thing, I'm not convinced. In fact, I don't think you can prove it." A few murmurs rippled through the courtroom. People shifted uncomfortably in their seats, watching the back and forth unfold between the blind officer and the powerful judge. Judge Thompson's eyes narrowed, and with a sharp motion, he gestured toward the witness stand, where Marcus sat confidently, his hands resting calmly on the table before him. "I've heard your claims, officer," Thompson continued, his voice low but commanding, "but claims are just words. I need proof. I dare you to show me that you and your dog can function as a cohesive unit in real time. Prove it to me right here, right now." The challenge was as clear as it was blunt. There was no room for hesitation. It wasn't just about proving his worth to Judge Thompson. It was about proving his place in the force, his place in the world of law enforcement, and his belief in himself. Marcus knew what this meant. This wasn't just a courtroom battle. This was his future, his career, and his identity on the line. Marcus took a deep breath, the calmness of his response a stark contrast to the storm of tension surrounding him. He could feel the weight of every eye in the courtroom on him. He knew they were all waiting, hoping to see him fail, but he would not let them see him falter. "I understand your request, Your Honor," Marcus said, his voice steady and unwavering. He could feel the weight of every word he spoke, as if each syllable was measured and calculated for maximum impact. "But I'm telling you right now that Max and I are a team. We've been through things most people can't even imagine. We've worked together through high-speed chases, hostage situations, and countless dangerous situations. I trust him with my life, and he trusts me." Marcus let the silence hang in the room for a moment, allowing his words to sink in. He could hear the occasional shuffle of feet and the soft scribbling of pens in the audience, but no one dared interrupt him. "Max doesn't just help me do my job, he enhances it," Marcus continued, his gaze steady as he looked directly at Judge Thompson. "I may not be able to see, but I have the rest of my senses to guide me. Max and I work in sync like a well-oiled machine. He's not just a dog. He's my partner, my eyes when I cannot see." The judge's eyes narrowed further, clearly unconvinced. He crossed his arms, his jaw set, a slight smirk playing at the corner of his lips. "That's all very nice, Officer Carter," Judge Thompson said slowly. "But nice words are easy. Show me. Prove it. Show me that you and this dog of yours can perform as a team in real time. I want to see it for myself." Marcus's heart rate increased slightly. The judge had just given him the ultimatum he knew would come, but it didn't scare him. If anything, it fueled him. He knew that Max could do this. Max had been with him through the worst of times, and Marcus trusted him with a certainty that could not be shaken. But this wasn't just about trusting Max. It was about showing the world what they could do. Marcus had never been one to back down from a challenge, and this was no different. "All right, Your Honor," Marcus said, his voice calm and clear. "We'll show you." The room seemed to hold its breath as Marcus prepared for the demonstration. The judge raised an eyebrow, seemingly confident that Marcus would fail. He leaned back in his chair, a quiet satisfaction creeping into his expression. He was sure this was nothing more than an elaborate trick, an attempt to hide the inherent flaw of a blind officer. Marcus, however, was determined to prove him wrong. He turned to Max, who sat quietly by his side, his ears alert. The bond between Marcus and Max was unmistakable, and it was clear to anyone who had witnessed them in action that they were more than just a team. They were a perfect partnership. Max wasn't just Marcus's companion. He was his partner in every sense of the word. Marcus felt the familiar surge of confidence flood through him as he gave Max the simple command, "Seek." Max's ears perked up instantly, his body stiffening as he focused on the room around him. The German Shepherd was more than just a well-trained K9. He was Marcus's eyes, his guiding force in the world of shadows and uncertainty. Max's senses were fine-tuned to perfection. His sharp nose could detect a criminal hiding in the crowd, his ears could pick up the faintest of sounds, and his eyes, well, Max's eyes had become an extension of Marcus's very being. For a moment, it seemed as though the room was suspended in time, the tension so thick that it could be cut with a knife. The people in the courtroom watched, some with skepticism, others with rapt attention, as Marcus and Max took their first step in proving their worth. Max began to scan the room, his head swiveling from side to side as he took in every scent, every noise. His paws padded softly across the floor, his movements fluid and precise. He was on a mission, no different than any of the countless others he had been a part of during his career with Marcus. Marcus stood still, his senses heightened. He could feel the air shift as Max moved, the subtle pull of the dog's movements guiding him forward. He trusted Max's instincts, just as he had done hundreds of times before. The room was silent except for the sound of Max's movements, each step a testament to their years of training and shared experiences. Then, without warning, Max stopped. His ears perked up and his body stiffened as he focused on something in the back of the room. Marcus's heart skipped a beat. He had seen this before. He knew that Max had found something important. The energy in the room shifted. People began to murmur under their breath, but Marcus remained still, his eyes focused ahead, trusting Max completely. "Max," Marcus whispered, his voice low but firm. "What do you have?" Max began to move, his powerful body gliding through the room with purpose. The crowd watched in stunned silence as the German Shepherd approached the back of the room where a man sat, nervously shifting in his seat. Judge Thompson leaned forward, his brow furrowing. He wasn't quite sure what was happening, but he could sense something was unfolding. As Max approached the suspect, the man's eyes widened in panic. He stood up abruptly, but Max was faster. With a low growl, the dog cornered the man, forcing him back into his seat. The courtroom was on edge, the tension palpable as officers moved toward the man. In the span of a few moments, the man was apprehended, and a concealed weapon was found on his person. The officers confirmed that the man was a wanted fugitive, his identity linked to a string of robberies. The gasps in the room were deafening. Judge Thompson, who had expected failure, now found himself speechless, staring at the scene unfolding before him. Marcus turned to the judge, his gaze unwavering, and asked, "Still think we can't do our jobs, Your Honor?" Judge Thompson's expression was unreadable, but his silence spoke volumes. He cleared his throat, visibly rattled by what he had just witnessed. "I think I've seen enough." And with that, the first part of Marcus and Max's battle was won. The tension in the courtroom was palpable as Officer Marcus Carter stood silently, his hands resting lightly on the table before him. His gaze was fixed ahead, but his mind was working overtime, calculating each second, each move, as if he were preparing for a high-stakes operation. Today, the stakes were higher than they had ever been. Today, it wasn't just a matter of criminals and justice. It was about proving his worth to an entire room of doubters, led by Judge Brandon Thompson. The judge had demanded that Marcus demonstrate his abilities as a blind officer in real time, with Max, his loyal K-9 partner, at his side. Marcus knew what was at stake: his career, his reputation, and his future in law enforcement. But more than that, Marcus knew that this moment wasn't just about him. It was about showing the world that his disability didn't define him, that he and Max were a force to be reckoned with, not in spite of his blindness, but because of the bond they shared. Together they were a team, and Marcus was prepared to prove it. The courtroom was still, as the judge's sharp eyes narrowed in expectation. The air felt thick with the weight of Judge Thompson's skepticism, his doubt radiating out toward Marcus like a physical force. He had already made up his mind. He didn't believe that a blind officer could be effective, and he certainly didn't believe that a K-9 could make up for the loss of vision. Marcus could feel it. The judge's challenge was not just a question. It was a test of everything he had worked for in his career. With a deep breath, Marcus turned to Max, who had been sitting quietly by his side, his eyes focused and alert. The German shepherd's sharp senses were attuned to every movement in the room, every whisper of sound. Max's body was tense, ready for action. The bond between them was undeniable. Marcus and Max had been partners for years, and in that time they had learned to communicate without words. They understood each other perfectly. "Max," Marcus said calmly, his voice carrying across the silent room, "search." At the command, Max's ears perked up instantly, his body shifting into action. His nose began to twitch as he took in the sense of the room, analyzing every detail, his focus narrowing in on potential threats. Marcus could feel the subtle shift in the air as Max's movements began to take on a fluid, purposeful rhythm. It was as if the world around them had fallen away, leaving only Max's heightened senses and Marcus's steady guidance. For a moment, there was only the sound of Max's paws clicking softly against the polished wooden floor, his movements precise, as if he were searching for a needle in a haystack. The courtroom was so quiet now that every footstep, every breath, seemed amplified. Spectators leaned forward in their seats, watching the blind officer and his K-9 partner as they moved in perfect sync. Marcus remained calm, his hand resting lightly on the table. He didn't need to see to know exactly where Max was and what he was doing. His connection with his partner was so strong that it transcended sight. He could feel the dog's movements, could sense Max's every action, like a second skin. But despite the precision with which Max was working, there was something in the air that told Marcus that this wasn't going to be just another simple demonstration. Something was off. Judge Thompson, however, was not impressed. He watched the scene unfold before him with a cold, dismissive gaze. He had seen enough of these show and tell demonstrations to know that they often amounted to nothing. He didn't believe that a blind officer and his dog could truly make a difference in a real-world situation. To him, this was nothing more than a performance, a staged act meant to placate the courtroom's doubts. The judge shifted in his seat, his voice cutting through the silence as he scoffed. "How quaint," Judge Thompson muttered under his breath, just loud enough for those near him to hear. "A blind man and his dog. Surely this is just a gimmick." He didn't think they could pull it off. He didn't think Max could possibly detect anything of significance, let alone find something that would prove Marcus's value as a police officer. Judge Thompson leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, his face twisted in an expression of disbelief. He was not going to be impressed by a dog sniffing around for a few minutes. He was waiting for the inevitable failure. As Marcus continued to stand still, trusting in Max, he could feel the judge's doubt growing stronger. The murmurs of the audience, the whispered comments, All of it echoed in his ears like a distant noise. But Marcus was focused. His heart rate was steady, his mind sharp. He could feel Max working the room, moving from person to person, sniffing for any trace of danger. Suddenly, Max stopped. The German shepherd's body stiffened, his eyes locking onto something or someone in the far corner of the room. His tail gave a single, subtle twitch, and Marcus immediately knew that something had caught his attention. It wasn't just a passing scent or a minor distraction. This was something more. Max's instincts were never wrong. "What is it, Max?" Marcus whispered softly, his voice low but full of command. He didn't need to see the room to know that Max had found something. He could feel the shift in the air, the change in the dog's body language. Max began to move with purpose, heading toward the back of the room where the audience had been seated. His movements were swift, confident, and the crowd seemed to hold their breath as they watched the dog make his way through the room. Marcus's heart began to race just a little faster as he felt the energy shift. Judge Thompson sat up straighter, now fully intrigued. He watched as Max moved toward a man sitting near the exit, his posture rigid, his eyes darting nervously around the room. The man was tall, middle-aged, with graying hair and a nervous twitch in his fingers as he fidgeted with a small object in his lap. His body language was unmistakable: anxiety, fear, and something else, something that sent a ripple of unease through Marcus's senses. Max stopped in front of the man, his eyes locking onto him with unnerving intensity. The man's breath caught in his throat as Max stood still, not moving, only watching him, his stance firm and resolute. For a split second, everything froze, and then the unmistakable smell hit Marcus, sharp, acrid, and terrifying. Explosives. The scent was faint at first, a whisper of danger that seemed to hang in the air, but within seconds it became more pronounced. It was unmistakable. Marcus's heart skipped a beat, his mind racing as he pieced together what was happening. The man had a bomb, or at least he was carrying something dangerous, something that could bring chaos and destruction to the courtroom. Max's growl cut through the silence like a knife, low and menacing. The dog was not just alert anymore. He was warning, a signal that the danger was real. The man, realizing that Max had discovered his secret, jumped to his feet, a look of sheer panic in his eyes. The audience gasped as the man bolted toward the door, his panic evident in every movement. But Max was faster. The German shepherd lunged forward, cutting off the man's escape route with precision. The suspect froze, his face drained of color as he realized that his plan had been foiled by a blind officer and his dog. The air in the room seemed to thicken with tension as law enforcement officers surged forward, securing the suspect and quickly taking control of the situation. Within seconds, the man was on the ground, cuffed and detained, but the implications of the discovery were still sinking in. The courtroom was filled with stunned silence. Gasps echoed from every corner as the officers searched the suspect and found what they had feared: a concealed explosive device carefully hidden under his coat. Marcus stood motionless, his focus never leaving Max. The dog's body remained tense, his eyes still locked on the suspect as though daring him to make another move. It was a moment of pure instinct, the culmination of years of training and partnership. Judge Thompson, who had once scoffed at the idea of a blind officer and his dog, now found himself speechless. His eyes darted from Marcus to Max and then to the restrained suspect. The air was thick with disbelief, and for the first time since this trial had begun, the judge seemed to recognize the power of what he had just witnessed. Marcus turned slowly toward the judge, his voice steady and unyielding. "You still think we can't do our jobs, Your Honor?" Judge Thompson's mouth opened, but no words came out. The courtroom, which had once been filled with doubt, was now filled with nothing but stunned silence. In that moment, Marcus knew that he and Max had just proven their worth, not just to the judge, but to everyone who had ever doubted them. The test was over, and they had passed it with flying colors. The tension in the courtroom escalated to a level that could only be described as electric. The once muted sounds of shuffling papers and murmurs from the audience now seemed like faint background noise compared to the urgency of the moment. Marcus Carter stood poised, every sense on high alert. Max, his loyal German shepherd, remained rigid by his side, his focus unbreakable as they both waited for the next move. The discovery had been made. The man sitting near the exit, who had initially appeared to be just another spectator, was now the center of a rapidly unfolding crisis. The suspect, caught in Max's unrelenting gaze, was visibly sweating, panic written all over his face. His every movement betrayed the fear he tried to suppress. It was as though the walls of the courtroom were closing in on him. He had been so close to slipping away, unnoticed by security, but Max's keen senses had put an end to his plan before it had the chance to escalate. As Max stood guard over the suspect, growling low and warning of the imminent danger, officers rushed toward the man with incredible speed. The room had already been thrown into chaos, but now, the officers' swift actions commanded attention. Their training kicked in immediately. They didn't hesitate. They approached the suspect with precision, restraining him before he had a chance to make another move. It didn't take long for them to uncover the truth. The suspect was armed. Beneath his coat, hidden in plain sight, was a concealed weapon, a bomb, cleverly disguised to avoid detection by the usual security measures. The officers quickly surrounded the suspect, checking him for any further weapons or explosives. The sheer scale of the threat became apparent as the officers in the courtroom realized the gravity of the situation. The suspect had been carrying a device capable of devastating destruction. Had it not been for Max's timely intervention, the consequences could have been catastrophic. The courtroom, filled with civilians and officers alike, had been mere seconds away from a violent explosion. While the officers worked efficiently to secure the area and neutralize the danger, Marcus remained standing calmly, his expression unreadable, but his heart racing. He had always known that Max's senses were beyond compare, but witnessing the immediate danger averted in front of him left him with a sense of quiet pride. This was not a performance. This was a real-life example of their teamwork, of their partnership saving lives when it mattered most. Marcus slowly turned to face Judge Brandon Thompson, who had been observing the scene with a growing sense of disbelief. The judge's eyes, once sharp and condescending, were now wide with shock as he watched the officers subdue the suspect. The room had gone deathly silent as the reality of what had just occurred began to sink in. No one had expected the blind officer and his K-9 partner to be the ones to stop a potential terrorist attack in the heart of the courtroom. Judge Thompson, still in his seat, was visibly struggling to find the right words. His hands were clenched tightly, his jaw rigid, and his mind was clearly racing as he processed the gravity of what had just transpired. For the first time in this entire ordeal, the judge was speechless. He had underestimated Marcus and Max. He had thought they were merely a gimmick, a novelty that would falter under scrutiny. But in the face of real danger, they had proven their worth in ways he could not have imagined. For a long, tense moment, the entire courtroom remained silent, the only sounds coming from the officers as they checked the suspect for additional explosives and secured the area. The air was thick with anticipation. Everyone waited for the next move, the next word to be spoken as all eyes turned toward Marcus. Then, with calm certainty, Marcus spoke, his voice cutting through the silence. "Still think we can't do our jobs, Your Honor." The words echoed through the courtroom, and as they did, the weight of the situation became fully apparent. The judge had no response at first. His eyes flicked from the subdued suspect, who was now being led out of the courtroom by the officers, to the officers themselves, who were double-checking the bomb threat and ensuring the safety of the public. Then, his gaze finally landed on Marcus and Max. Marcus had asked a simple question, but in that moment, it carried the weight of everything that had happened. He had not only proven himself, but had demonstrated the value of his partnership with Max, an unbreakable bond that allowed them to do what others deemed impossible. For a moment, Judge Thompson said nothing. His mouth opened as if to speak, but no words came out. The silence stretched on, heavy and profound, as the reality of the situation set in. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the judge cleared his throat. The change in his demeanor was subtle but undeniable. His shoulders relaxed, the harsh line of his jaw softened, and he looked down at his papers before lifting his gaze back to Marcus. I think I've seen enough," Judge Thompson said slowly, his voice tinged with a note of something Marcus had not expected, humility. The judge's tone lacked its earlier arrogance. Instead, there was a trace of acknowledgement, a recognition that he had made a mistake, one that he could no longer ignore. The room held its breath. The entire courtroom seemed to wait for the final decision, for the moment when Marcus's fate would be sealed. After a long pause, Judge Thompson spoke again, his voice now quieter, more reflective. "Officer Carter, I must admit that I have been wrong." He paused, as if the weight of his words were still sinking in. "Your actions today, along with your partnership with Max, have proven that you are more than capable of performing your duties. In fact, I believe you've saved lives today." The judge hesitated, his eyes briefly scanning the courtroom as if searching for confirmation of his own words. Marcus remained still, his gaze fixed on the judge. "I hereby grant your petition to remain on the force." Judge Thompson's voice grew more authoritative. "And I believe that you and Max deserve a commendation for today's actions. You've demonstrated the kind of courage and dedication that we need in our law enforcement." The room exploded in applause. The officers, the civilians, even the skeptical spectators, all rose to their feet and clapped for Marcus and Max. The recognition was not just for the blind officer and his dog, but for everything they had endured and achieved together. For the first time in this long, grueling trial, Marcus allowed himself a small, satisfied smile. The battle wasn't over yet, but he had won this round. As the applause echoed through the room, Marcus turned to Max. The dog's tail was wagging furiously, his eyes locked on Marcus with an understanding that only they shared. Marcus knelt down beside him, his voice a soft whisper as he whispered the words only Max could hear. "We did it, buddy," Marcus said, his voice thick with emotion. Max responded with a soft bark, a sound of reassurance as if to say, "We always do." Marcus's gaze then shifted back to Judge Thompson, who was still standing, the slight surprise in his face gradually shifting to respect. The judge nodded at Marcus, acknowledging not just his victory but the bond between him and his K-9 partner. And just like that, Marcus Carter, blind officer, unyielding in his determination and with Max by his side, had proven that courage and capability were not determined by sight, but by the heart, the mind, and the unbreakable bond between them. The courtroom, still filled with the echoes of applause, had witnessed the true meaning of teamwork, courage, and justice. And in that moment, Marcus Carter knew that this was only the beginning of a much bigger story. The applause filled the courtroom like a wave crashing against the shore, overwhelming in its intensity, echoing off the high ceilings of the New Orleans City Court. The room, moments ago tense and filled with skepticism, had transformed into a place of admiration and respect. The crowd, which had been divided in their views of Marcus Carter and his blind partnership with Max, now stood united in their applause. Even the staunchest doubters could not deny what they had witnessed, a true display of bravery, skill, and teamwork that had saved lives. Marcus Carter stood at the center of the room, his posture unwavering, his expression one of quiet pride. Beside him, Max, his loyal German shepherd partner, wagged his tail energetically, his keen eyes scanning the room as though he understood the significance of the moment. Marcus had always known that he and Max shared something special, something beyond just a police partnership. But today, the world had seen it too. It wasn't just the way they worked together. It was the unspoken connection between them, the understanding that had allowed them to accomplish what others thought impossible. As the applause began to subside, Judge Brandon Thompson slowly rose from his seat behind the bench. His movements were deliberate, measured, but there was no mistaking the change in his demeanor. The arrogance that had previously defined him was gone, replaced by an air of humility and respect. He looked out at Marcus and Max with a new sense of recognition. "Officer Carter," Judge Thompson began, his voice firm but softened by the weight of his words, "I stand here today not just as a judge, but as someone who has seen firsthand what true bravery looks like. You and Max have shown me and this entire courtroom that courage is not determined by what you can see, but by what you believe in, and more importantly, by who you trust." Marcus felt a slight shift in his chest at the judge's words, a sense of validation that had eluded him for so long. He had never sought validation from anyone, except himself and Max, but hearing it now from the man who had once doubted him was a testament to everything he had fought for. Judge Thompson paused, letting his words sink in before continuing, his tone even more somber. "It is clear to me now that your blindness does not define you, Officer Carter. It is your strength, your perseverance, and the bond you share with Max that make you who you are. And for that, you both deserve more than just my recognition." The courtroom was quiet again, save for the soft rustling of people adjusting in their seats. The audience leaned forward, sensing that this was the pivotal moment they had all been waiting for, the moment that would mark the culmination of Marcus's struggle for acceptance. "I hereby grant your petition to remain on the force, Officer Carter," Judge Thompson announced, his voice resolute. "And in addition, I recommend a commendation for both you and Max. For your bravery, for your service, and for the lives you've saved today, you both deserve to be honored for your actions." A renewed round of applause erupted from the audience, louder this time, more heartfelt. It wasn't just about Marcus anymore. It was about the message his story sent to everyone who had ever been told that they couldn't do something simply because they were different. The courtroom had witnessed an act of courage and determination that had surpassed every expectation. The applause wasn't just for Marcus. It was for the values he represented: perseverance, trust, and the belief that true strength came from within. Max barked once, a cheerful and proud sound, as though he too understood that this moment was theirs. His tail wagged furiously, and for a moment, Marcus allowed himself to kneel down beside him, his hand resting gently on Max's head. The dog's eyes, always so full of intelligence and loyalty, met Marcus's gaze. There was no need for words. They both understood the significance of what had just transpired. Marcus, his heart swelling with emotion, whispered softly, "We did it, buddy." Max let out a soft bark in response, his eyes never leaving his partner, as if to reassure him that they were always a team, no matter what. Judge Thompson watched the interaction with a look of admiration. His eyes softened as he saw the connection between man and dog, the unspoken bond that had been the key to their success. The judge had been wrong about many things, but now he understood. He had seen for himself that true strength does not come from what you can see, but from what you believe in and who you trust. As the applause began to die down, Marcus stood tall once again, his chest swelling with pride. Not because of the approval from the courtroom, but because he knew that today he had proven to himself that he was capable of more than even he had ever imagined. He had fought not just for his place on the force, but for his right to be seen as a capable and worthy officer, regardless of his blindness. Max, as always, was at his side, unwavering and loyal. Together, they had demonstrated that courage was not about the obstacles in front of you, but the strength inside you to overcome them. As the proceedings came to a close and the courtroom slowly began to empty, Marcus and Max walked out together, heads held high. The doors swung open, and for the first time in a long while, Marcus felt truly seen, not just as a blind officer, but as a man who had overcome every doubt and proven that he, too, had a place in the world of law enforcement. The story of Marcus Carter and Max would not just be remembered as a tale of a blind officer and his dog. It would be remembered as a powerful reminder that courage is not about what you can see. It's about what you believe in and who you trust to help you achieve the impossible. As the final echoes of applause faded into the background, the message was clear. True strength comes from within. And together, Marcus and Max had shown the world that anything is possible when you trust in each other. And that was the true victory.